Hello and welcome to Fire Headlines, where we cover the hottest topics in fire service news. I'm your host, Samantha Didion, and joining me on the panel today is Chief Bob Horton and Chief Jeff Buchanan. Our topic today is firefighter training simulators. The Daily Dispatch recently shared an article discussing a North Texas fire department that has partnered with a video game maker to create a first-of-its-kind simulator called Ares. The article says firefighters train on this multiplayer video simulator with a battalion chief in another room calling the shots. Jeff, this sounds like something that would be really popular amongst the younger generation firefighters, but what's your take on this new simulator?
Great to see you, Samantha. Great to see you, Bob. I'll tell you, well, let me roll back the wheels of time a little bit to talk about virtual reality and this type of a system. I was in the Baltimore area. This is a number of years ago. And for whatever the reason was, they have what's called a maritime university. And in this university, they train large vessel, seagoing vessels like tankers. This is where they train all of the pilots or the captains. And it was an incredible facility. Imagine going into a room when all of the walls are screens. So you actually feel like you are in the control center of a huge vessel. It was virtual reality, right? They were actually learning how to drive and navigate big boats in this particular area. And it was one of their single, as I recall, most fundamental learning tools that they used. Fast forward to just about 3 or 4 or 5 months ago, I had the unique opportunity to visit Microsoft in one of their, not their headquarters, but one of their campuses. And they had an incredible flight simulator where you actually got in a little plane, and it was just like being a pilot. And in front of you, imagine massive screens. And so as we talk about firefighting, what has to happen is exactly what we're seeing. And while it may be new to firefighting, although NIST was testing some technology that I saw, I think it was last year or the year before, VR, very similar to what this article talks about. It may be new in regard to Ares or some of the nuances in this particular piece of technology. The concept isn't new. I think it is going to move us forward. And Samantha, you talked about to the newer generation, and I think that this is completely expandable. The video game aspect may tailor itself to a younger demographic, but having that lifelike feel and using virtual reality, using TV screens in order to mimic an environment, I think can be received really, really well for all ages. And I think it plays back a little bit into our prior episodes when we're talking about innovation. Sometimes there are time constraints. Sometimes there are money constraints. Sometimes there are location restraints, equipment restraints in order to reproduce a realistic scenario. Firefighting is a unique experience, and every time you fight a fire, even a controlled one, there are noxious chemicals that you're exposed to. There are hostile environments that you're exposed to, and it isn't in the best interest of anyone to make those a regular occurrence. And on the military side of things and the law enforcement side of things, Bob, and I don't know if you ever had a chance to go up to a shoot house, which is where they actually have it reinforced so you can do simulated munitions and some more kind of closer to reality type training. In my opinion, this is an excellent alternative. leverage innovation, leverage technology, give an RBT, a reality-based training environment that is augmented through augmented reality, virtual reality. And I think that we're going to see firefighters that can still maintain a level of proficiency in a world where year over year, the amount of fires that we're fighting, internal structures, are going down because of codes and construction and all these other things. So I think it is a edgy way to train your workforce, and I think it's a great solution. But similar to some things I said in the past, not a complete. This can't be a supplant. We're going to supplant all real training with virtual reality. I think that blending this type of technology is a really smart approach.
First, I want the record to note that our generation, like we grew through like the Atari, original Nintendo to the Xbox was still part of our generation. So I will not accept only the new generation gets to own the video game space, albeit it's improved so much more. And I don't know that we could have put a headset on, talk like we're talking, right now in any kind of environment when we were growing up. But we had, when Jeff and I were training to be officers, we had some simulation, some computer-based simulation programs that were just flat out hokey, but it was on the bleeding edge of this idea of how do we integrate, folks who are located in different places to run scenarios to supplement the type of training we were already doing, the hands-on live training on the fire ground. I don't know that it landed, but we tried. And this technology is continuing to improve and continuing to improve. If you watch the video from this article, they show you parts of the game, and I can see someone's reaction to that being like, this is hokey and it doesn't really create the right environment. And that's one lens. Like that's one way you could look at it. I tend to look at it the other way, which is what does this provide for us as an opportunity to train, learn, and develop in ways that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do, but for the fact that we have this virtual reality simulation software. So it will continue to improve. The graphics will continue to improve. The realism will continue to improve. But what it does for our folks today is it allows us to test protocols and policy. It allows for us to test and retest and train decision-making in the environment that folks are facing, like the communication system within this about how do you communicate on the radio, and the timing is more realistic than some of the ways that we tried to approach this, doing scenarios as folks who are training, either as officers or to become officers. You order a resource. I need another engine to this fire. Okay, your engine shows up. Nothing happened in the fire because you're looking at a 2D picture. It just sort of sits there. So you could see how these developers, working in conjunction with fire professionals, are going to continue to elevate what the realistic environmental conditions are in terms of how fast a fire can move and spread, reaction to the type of construction and the flammable materials that are in or within that particular scenario. And they're continuing to develop it with actual realism to buildings or structures that are within your response district. So I think this is really important. I think what Jeff highlighted is true, because a lot of people will see this and feel like it will supplant or replace any realism, any training in realism, like on an actual ground. I don't know that it'll ever do that. And I don't know that it ever should do that, because we still need exposure, with actual muscle memory. What this does is train our thinking. And that's what I like about it, is it gets us to think more critically. Let's be honest, as officers, we are grossly overconfident. We train ourselves to be overconfident in our ability to lead a scenario or an emerging incident with limited information. And what this starts to do, as we integrate all the different technology solutions we've talked about and some that we haven't, is we start to introduce new variables and data pieces to the decision environment. And we get to test it in a simulation like this and see how well do these new communication protocols work? How much clarity do you have? Because what I see on my screen isn't what you, Samantha, or you, Jeff, are seeing on your screen. So I'm trying to paint a picture of what I see, and you're seeing something completely different. When we were starting with computer-based work like this, it didn't necessarily work that way. Kind of all, whatever we saw on our screen, we all saw on our screen. So I got a far away, I think, from what your question really was. But the value I see here is critical thinking, information needed for decision-making, improved decision-making.
Something else that this article says is that not only is this video game simulator meant to enhance performance, but it's also meant to minimize errors during real life firefighter operations. Can you guys kind of pull that apart and see what the reality of that is? Do you think that the simulator can accomplish that?
I'll take the first stab at that. In the fire service, we like to say sets and reps, which you can pull from so many different types of research and athletics. The more that you do things, but here's a key. It's not just repeating an action or a performance. It's conscientiously with a mindset of repeating. You can get really good at things. There's a lot of research on brain activity versus visualizing and doing certain things. But what you're seeing across the country and in so many different places is a decrease in structure fires. Why? Because there are code enhancements, material changes, and we're building a safer environment. There's more sprinkler interaction inside of construction. So what this permits the user to do is interact, although virtually, with an environment that they may not see but 1 or 2 times a year in a real situation. So it gives them the ability to react more fluidly in a situation because they've seen something that was similar, even though it was in an artificial environment. So it's about sets and reps. Said more plainly, it's about repeating something over and over and over again, seeing similar situations so you can react more quickly. And here's the reality, because there's a couple of things that are colliding right now. And yes, we see some of these particular types of fires go down, but there is this a huge danger component. We have uncovered that our turnouts have been exposing firefighters. So there's a whole new challenge there. And so we find ourselves as the end users, executives making these decisions. Okay, is it more important or how do I prioritize? Because if everything's important, nothing's important. One must prioritize, okay, do I see more value or more destruction if I put a firefighter into a piece of gear that I'm not comfortable with? Because let's just pretend for a moment there's no alternatives. Or is the consequence higher or somehow the value lower with putting them into an augmented reality that isn't the real thing? The reality is that there's consequences to both, but which one do you see has the higher priority? So you have this notion that you have to train your people, but in a world where there are no unlimited resources, economic, and in this case, there are consequences. There's some dangers. You have people that have to make really, really hard choices. So we're trying to build firefighters that are proficient. I think you have to combat that proficiency through sets and reps with virtual reality if you have that ability, because there are so many other factors that has to be considered.
And I would add that I'm going to assume that these simulations are built with fire progression, fire science in mind. Like in that scenario, in the video, it shows the task of a firefighter breaking out a window with their axe. And if the simulation doesn't react the way a fire would react, by introducing that kind of oxygen, by knocking out a window or creating a ventilation, which is probably what they were doing. We will be missing a little bit of what it is that where we need to be. And I bring that up because answer your question, Samantha, which is the time to make errors, to make mistakes is during simulations. And by being able to run different scenario, the same factors, the same variables that are, the incident begins and you start to impact the incident by the decisions you make, that you could test different approaches to that fire with where you might allocate resources and when, and how that fire reacts to it. That's where we need to be with simulation. So we can learn and not just, we grew up in an era where, the fire went out, nobody got hurt. And we high five that was our metric for success, was fire went out, nobody got hurt. Clearly that's not good enough. Clearly we could be doing better tactically, and we could be more effective in reducing loss. And tools like this are going to help us understand, hose deployment or water flow and how it ends up affecting overall loss in a structure fire environment. So it's certainly not there yet, but that's where this is going. And the more opportunities you get to practice making the decisions that you would need to as an officer, as a firefighter, and put yourself into an environment, even if simulated like this, the better you're going to be. And most frequently when I made errors, and Lord knows I made plenty of them, I really tried hard not to make the same errors twice. So if I was going to make an error as a fire officer in decision making, I'd like it to be in a simulation, and that's where I want to learn.
Do you guys have any other advice for fire chiefs that might be considering implementing this new technology into their fire department?
My advice to any fire chief is be open-minded. Give things a try. I'm a big trial and error guy. A lot of these manufacturers will allow a sampling of some sort. It's new technology. Frankly, they could be seeking out fire departments in order to further test their product and work out the quote unquote bugs. So my advice is to be open-minded, and to the best you can, give things a try, because you may have people within your organization that are resistant, whether because it's a technological advancement or other reasons, other factors. But to push through some of that resistance and give new solutions a try in order to be more informed and intellectual about what may or may not work for your department. But try to resist any, and I'm not saying you got to go and try everything, so I'm not trying to say that either. Just be open-minded to checking out new solutions, and that's what I would say. Be open-minded.
And Chiefs, I think you should be receiving this ask from your firefighters to bring this type of tool into your training environment. This seems to me like something that would be well received by those who are in the sets and reps daily basis in the operational component. So, keeping the open mind that Jeff had said, and I think a lot of clarity around what does this tool do and what are its limitations? What is it not intended to do? Because, folks would latch onto this and give it, for fear that we're going to sort of let this displace conventional, physical firefighter training. And I wouldn't see that as being an issue at all where I've worked. I think people would recognize that that's what this is a supplementation to what training they're already able to do. But as we increase our constrained environment that we've talked a lot about in terms of time, or even mobilizing an entire alarm or 2 alarms worth of resources over to a training center to run a scenario is about time and resource prohibitive today in this day and age with how busy a lot of our units are. But finding some, an hour of downtime where everyone could log into the system, throw on the headset and engage in an incident like this in 15, 20 minutes and do that a few times a day seems perfectly plausible and reasonable to me. So I think keeping an open mind on that, I think is an incredibly useful tool, and wish we would have had it. I think we'd have been better officers if we did.
Well, thank you, Chiefs, for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. A link to the article we discussed can be found in the show notes. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and follow us on social media. If you have a question for the panel, please reach out to us at fireheadlines@wfca.com and let us know what's on your mind. We'll see you back here next week for more Fire Headlines.